It's impossible for me to write like a student, but having a student essay is a fantastic way for you to learn genuinely how grade 9 writers perform under exam conditions. So we have a very generous student, Adam, who's decided to compare London and Kamikaze, and he tells us this very interesting fact. Initially, his essay was scored at 26 out of 30, which would still be just into the grade 9, but when it was moderated and reread, it was bumped up to 30 out of 30. Well, I'll explore why the same essay could be interpreted so differently by English teachers later in the video. It's worth thinking through though, what did Adam do that he thought made it possible for him to get the grade 9? And this is what he said. For each poem I already had thoughts and analysis prepared. He'd gone into the exam knowing that whatever the question was going to be, he was still going to be able to put these thoughts on paper. He'd also planned how he was going to link it to other poems. And so his belief is that 90% of the exam is having done that preparation in advance. I'm going to teach you some extra stuff. The extra stuff is number 3 and 4. Start your essay with form and structure, because when we zoom into level 6, we'll find this phrase. There will be a fine-grained and insightful analysis of language, obviously, but form and structure. When we drop down to the level below, students are not expected to deal with both. And when we drop below that, there's just a clear explanation of the range of writers' methods. Form and structure disappears. What does that mean? It means that as soon as you start writing about form and structure, the examiner needs to put you into the top 2 grade bands, where grades 7, 8 and 9 are. So starting with form and structure guarantees the examiner already wants to give you top marks. And then the ultimate power I want to show, which is why it's in capitals, is this ability to just write. So the actual essay looks like this. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and a bit pages. Let's look at how Adam knew what he wanted to say no matter what the question. So he began with a rather unusual technique. He had this pre-prepared quotation which is nothing to do with the poem but is to do with war poems. So he knew that he was going to be able to use this quotation to begin any essay about any of the war poetry. I don't know how I feel about this, but it definitely didn't count against him, and it certainly made me think, as an examiner would, this answer's going to be rather different from others I'm going to read. It creates an element of intrigue and an expectation that the essay is going to be interesting. I'm already questioning whether it's going to be a top grade. We can see that he's already planned to begin by writing about structure. Firstly, both the structures of Blake's poem and Garland's poem mirror the effect of power. So he's linking what he's going to say about structure to the title about power, and he's prepared that in advance. In this colour, he knows what he wants to say about the structure of London. Not going to go through that yet, you'll see why later. Adam has also planned to use this phrase about semantic fields. The phrase itself also marks him out as an excellent student, but it helps him link his quotations together. He's going to say all these quotations relate to each other because they're within the same semantic field. That makes his answer more sophisticated, and he's also going to link that to the idea of power because remember, that's in the question. In his next paragraph, he's planned what he wants to say about Kamikaze. Alternatively, the structure in Kamikaze reflects the internal power of the pilot, which he's going to contrast to the power and propaganda of society. Next, he knows that he's going to write about the semantic fields. This is a phrase he knows is going to get him good marks because it then gives him a way to link his quotations together and to link it to power, which was in the question. So if we come down to the yellow here in his next paragraph, he knows that when he writes about Kamikaze, he's going to write about the semantic field linked to the sea. He's already prepared what he's going to say about Blake. He's going to focus in on this image of the whole city being chartered. And he already knows in his next paragraph down here that the semantic field of kamikaze that he wants to focus on is the imagery related to the sea and nature. That's quite useful for him because if the question is about nature, he knows that kamikaze will be a go-to poem he can use. The next technique he knows he wants to focus on is the use of contrast. That's really useful for you as well because every single poem you study will use this technique. So this is something you can definitely prepare in advance. Of course, he's already pre-prepared the quotation he wants to use, the marriage hearse, that will illustrate that contrast. And similarly, when we come to kamikaze, he's already planned what the contrast will be. It's going to be another two-word quotation, the Dark Prince. And he's already planned to talk about a new aspect of power, the power of masculinity. Next, he's decided that he wants to focus on the technique of metaphors. Again, every single poem you study will have metaphors in it. So this is an easy way to prepare in advance. If we jump back to the top of the mark scheme, you can see how useful this is. By talking about metaphor and contrast and semantic fields, he knows that he's nailing language. But contrast is also an element of structure, and if you think about it, a semantic field is also an element of structure because it's linking different bits of language together in the structure of the poem. And then, is he writing about the right subject terminology? Well, of course he is. Semantic fields, metaphor and contrast are very relevant to every single poem. And if he doesn't quite make the top band, he will have certainly nailed the idea of having a detailed examination of language, and his subject terminology will definitely be apt, which means correct. Now, because Adam has prepared for the exam, he also knows which quotation he wants to focus on with the metaphor. After all, there could be a range in each poem, but he knows the one which has highest value. The idea that the soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. Similarly, he's also planned which metaphor he's going to use from kamikaze, the turbulent inrush of breakers. Which is interesting because I don't think it's actually a metaphor. He's actually going to analyse this as a symbol, linking it to the cairns on the shore. But he will get away with this because his analysis of that symbol, this paragraph here, is very sophisticated. The other really useful bit of preparation Adam's put in is he's decided in advance what his conclusion is going to be. In conclusion, both London and kamikaze have underlying messages of the exploitation of the powerless and the lack of a voice the poor possess. However, there is hope. As Blake warns of impending revolution, the pilot takes it upon himself to take control of his own future. There may be light at the end of the tunnel, but even today, older men declare war, but the youth die fighting to show this cycle still repeats itself today, though Blake warns us of this centuries ago. So in a neat trick, the conclusion links us back to that quotation right at the beginning of the poem about older men declaring war but young men dying. Let me now show you the impact of number 4. So when we zoom out, I'll show you what 1,324 words looks like. That's what Adam managed to write in 45 minutes under exam conditions. But my slightly orange highlighting shows you the stuff that for me was not convincing. Now that's really important for you to know. I tell all my students just write, because when you keep writing, bad ideas will turn into good ideas. By writing some stuff that doesn't really score marks, your brain then links to other stuff that will. It also helps explain why one teacher has said, "Oh, I'm giving it 26, and the other teacher has said, "No, I'm giving it full marks." And this is another really useful thing for you to know about how the exam works. The examiners are trained to ignore the stuff that doesn't score well and just reward the stuff that does. And because Adam has just kept writing, there are 900 words of grade 9 stuff. And Adam does something really well, which I try to train all my students to do. Write in joined up handwriting, which is just neat enough to be read, but no neater. Neat handwriting slows you down, which means you write less, which means you make fewer points, which means you can't get as many marks. But writing quickly with joined up handwriting helps you get loads down on the page, and you will get higher marks because you will make many more points, which will overcome the points which aren't so successful. I hope you're curious to find out what sort of stuff doesn't score marks. It is actually linked around the same thing. It's when you write about structure, you often write gibberish. Let's zoom in to see what I mean. In London, there is a lack of enjambment. Well, that will be true between the stanzas to show how from the outside London is such a beautiful and organised place. No, there is no connection between the lack of enjambment and what Adam is claiming here. And students do this all the time. Now, you can certainly link enjambment to a freedom of thought, and that would have gone down brilliantly with this poem because it contrasts with the mind-forged manacles. So just as people's minds are constrained, so the lines are constrained in the poem. That would have got him top of the mark scheme. So all of this explaining the effect of the enjambment is actually made up stuff. In Kamikaze, Adam did link the enjambment to this idea of personal freedom. It went down very well. But then he argues that the enjambment is broken with a full stop to show how the pilots have broken away from the Japanese tradition. Well, there's no way on earth how a full stop is going to symbolise anything like that. Everything needs a full stop. It's called a sentence. You're going to have loads of sentences in a poem. You can't suddenly start arguing that a full stop has that meaning. You will notice Adam didn't really write about form at all, and writing about form is such an easy way to get into the top band. If you would like to learn how to do that better when writing about London, check out the video which has already appeared on your screen.